Welcome to Stirring Up the Lees. This is Stirring Up the Lees on location. Me and my residence, Jeff and his residence, taking all precautions during lockdown. That'd be good to get back in the studio,
A little higher quality than this Zoom call. What month is it? I guess we're in January.
Speaking of January, the purpose of today's episode has a lot to do with January, dry January. That's why we're here. It's been gaining popularity, I would assume. Although I'm not sure about this year in particular.
Yeah, it seems to be, and I don't know outside of the trades. My anecdotal impression is that the trades like increasingly participating or doing dry January.
Well, that's kind of what their market's doing, so they need to learn how to deal with it and learn how to maybe have a pretty dry month in terms of sales and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a double-edged sword, I suppose, isn't it? On the one hand, it hurts your sales. I mean, with that in mind, though, January is never a big sales month. The big quarter of the year is always October, November, December. So you expect January to start the year relatively slow. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, I think as an industry, you want to promote moderation, ideally.
Yeah, for sure. And everybody in the industry should be on a beach somewhere because, you don't got to start pruning yet. You don't got to, the wines are just chilling. You don't have customers rolling through. Your restaurants are maybe slow, we should all just go away.
If we could, we would.
But mind you, if we were all sitting on a beach, we probably would have like some sort of cocktail in our hand.
Yeah, I'd probably have like a margarita.
Yeah.
Or a pina colada. I think pina coladas are actually underrated because to me, what's great about a pina colada is it's almost a meal in and of itself. It's a little bit of rum, but it's like a perfect mid-afternoon drink because it just gives you that little bit of energy. It's like, okay, I can make it to dinner now.
I like when you drank so many that your mouth starts to burn from all the pineapple juice.
To me, a pina colada is a one and done.
One and done.
If you have
That's smart.
If you have two, all of a sudden, that's like a full meal. How are you gonna have dinner? That's too much.
Overindulge.
But I think what's interesting to me about dry January is you're talking about moderation, and in a sense, like dry January is almost the opposite of that too, though, because it's like swinging so far in the opposite direction, where it's like, okay, we overdid it, over the holidays, that sort of thing, and then all of a sudden it's like, okay, now we're just gonna like go cold turkey in a sense.
Yeah, like think of the dependency your body's craving from the alcohol you just consumed over the holidays.
It's like, just have it as part of a normal, balanced
hard cut. And everybody gets depressed in January. It's like, well, anyway.
So with that in mind, today, I guess we're tasting 2 non-alcoholic wines.
Yeah, we're dry January with dry wines. Alcohol dry. Not.
Yeah, I don't think either of these wines are very dry. Is that still a cocktail you're drinking? As we get ready for this non-alcoholic wine episode.
That was not a cocktail. No alcohol to be seen here. Just 0.5%. Do we want to just jump right into this first one? I've got the bottle here. So we're on the Frexienet
0.0.
0.0. Alcohol-free sparkling. Light, fruity enjoyment. Is it actually? It's probably 0.5 though, right?
I think the website was 0.05.
0.05.
Yeah, I think the red we're gonna try is 0.5.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, okay. So Frexienet,
really a solid producer of great. Their black label cava is a great, affordable, everyday sparkling. Like really a go-to actually. Mm-hmm. They have a prosecco in the range now. Now they're adding the non-alcoholic sparkling. It's a relatively new wine, I believe, in the program. I think it was released, just a handful of years ago. What I like is at least you can like really pour yourself a big glass and not feel like you're
doing drink the whole bottle without worry. It's definitely strange, eh? You can immediately tell something's not quite right.
It's, I would say, like vaguely wine-like. Although I think if you poured this blind, would you call this wine? No. And I mean, I think we can speak to maybe why it is so different. because alcohol, one, is the natural byproduct of fermentation. Like the reason we get wine in the first place is we're converting the natural sugars in grapes to alcohol. But it's not just about getting a slight buzz and a little looser conversation. The alcohol fundamentally is an important part of the components of the wine in terms of what it brings, both from like kind of a weight and body perspective. Non-alcoholic wines don't have that same weight, but also how they affect the aromas of the wine as well.
Yeah, and so I think in making de-alcoholized wines, you're taking a wine into its parts, and then putting certain things back together and leaving the alcohol out. So you are left with these disjointed beverages at the end of the day.
Yeah, you're basically like putting the wine through the ringer, and then compiling it back together. You're starting out with alcohol, so you need to remove it. And the only way to remove that is through very invasive technological processes.
Yeah, you're either putting it through reverse osmosis or you're putting it through distillation. And either way, you're trying to extract the volatiles, the nice aromatics, the nice light small particles that you can keep, that gives a wine its kind of character. And then you're running it through again to get rid of the alcohol. And then you're just putting back the kind of that essence that you kept from the first run back into what's left. And you're kind of messing up the whole equilibrium of the drink while doing that.
Yeah. What's interesting too, though, it's not like that process is necessarily entirely removed from wine as we know it, because you have a lot of wines from warm climates that will go through reverse osmosis to take down the alcohol by a couple notches. Maybe it's 1-2% alcohol. If you're at 16, you want to bring it down to something more reasonable, like 14.5. We do that. Yeah. This is just taking it to the full extreme.
Yeah. Nth degree. Yeah. We're talking about like California's Zinfandels that are all of a sudden 16% alcohol. And while the structure of the wine might be able to carry it, people might not be so inclined to drink a 16% alcohol wine. So it runs through a similar process just to knock a few points off. But then, this is just to a whole nother level. And I think to get to 0.05 or 0.5, you're doing it multiple times, and you're probably losing something you don't want every single time.
Right.
To get to this point.
Yeah, which I guess is a good way of saying, it's not easy to make non-alcoholic wine.
Oh, it's almost cost prohibitive. Like, what are we paying for these de-alcoholized wines?
Under $10.
So you got to think the margins are extremely small, given just the equipment alone, but then the energy costs and the time it takes to remove the alcohol.
Yeah, I wonder, like, if people have looked at that market in terms of like, would someone pay $20 for a really good non-alcoholic wine, or is it just kind of like, this is what you get if you're going to drink non-alcoholic? But I think it's interesting for beer, because I feel like beer has a real push towards like low or non-alcoholic beers, and some of them allegedly are like quite good, almost like replaceable for beer. But I don't think I haven't seen anyone say that's the case for wine at all.
Right.
Even actually, I'm thinking of spirits now. Like there's a wide range of quite expensive non-alcoholic spirits. I don't know what the technical term is, but like non-alcoholic gin, that ranges like $30 to $40. So we're talking like what would be pretty boutique gin. Because I think, people are being more cognizant of how much they're drinking. I think we see that in the trends. Actually, there was just a report the other day that said that, especially younger demographics are very cognizant of how much they're drinking.
Right.
And I feel like as an industry, the wine industry doesn't do a great job sometimes. There's so many, they're not even jokes really. It's like when someone asks like, oh, what do you do when you have half a bottle of wine left over? And then the person behind the tasting bar is like, oh, I never have that problem. Ha ha. it's not very supportive of people where it's like, oh, I just want a glass or two glasses with dinner. So I think there is an opportunity for the industry to be more supportive from that perspective.
Or that classic joke that when people talk about spitting out wine and they're like, well, you never waste wine. It's like, well, if I'm in a professional setting, or I'll be tasting, tens of wines, hundreds of wines, I need to keep a clear head and be able to analyze stuff. So alcohol can't come into play with that.
Yeah. But what do we think? To me, smelling this, it reminds me of, and I didn't say what grape varieties were used in this, but it does speak to me of traditional indigenous Cava varieties.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was just thinking to myself, like, this reminds me a lot of a juice that you'd have in the winery a few days after you've pressed it or something, and you're settling it, like before fermentation, before it's wine, still grape juice.
Which is quite tasty.
Has that freshness to it.
Although what's interesting to me with this, so it is quite sweet. It's 54 grams per liter residual sugar. According to the technical information, the actual acidity in this is quite low. I think it was something like 3 grams per liter total acidity, which would be
extremely low.
Extremely low. Makes you almost think it's an error for like what's a sparkling wine in this case. But who knows? We'll trust it, I guess. And then the other thing is this isn't traditional method like you'd find in a cava. So we're getting the bubbles because it's been injected with carbon dioxide.
Yeah. And that's, when you bring that up, you're removing the alcohol, and then all of a sudden you've got this great stabilizing and protective piece of a wine that you need to replace now with other food preservative products. And because wines like this are marketed in grocery stores, all of a sudden it is a food product, and you see nutrition facts and you see ingredient lists and stuff of that nature that would not necessarily be on a bottle of wine with alcohol in it.
Yeah, this is kind of like all the winemaking tricks that you'd find in those like high volume, lower priced wines. Like if we just think of even how the sugar is getting into this, it's the rectified concentrated grape must, which is basically just super concentrated sugar from grapes. So it's still a grape derived product, but I mean, there's still some technology to get us there. But that's the same thing that you would find in like a lot of those sweet reds that we've drank before, where it's just added back. It's not like fermentation is arrested prior to dryness. It's like, no, we're adding the sugar back from this grape derived product, because obviously we can't add sugar in and of itself at that stage of the winemaking process.
Yeah, I mean, you look at the ingredients, obviously the largest one is alcohol-free wine, which is probably because it's the cheapest. There's like an ocean of wine that they can draw from to just de-alcoholize. And then everything else probably gets quite expensive when you're making this wine. Like you mentioned, the rectified grape must concentrate would not be cheap to produce, but I think that's what gives it its kind of freshness, its juicy character. We got into carbon dioxide, about how it's carbonated and not necessarily secondary fermentation in bottle. Then you've got sulfur dioxide as an antioxidant preservative, and then you've got potassium sorbate and DMDC, dimethyl dicarbonate. You've got gum arabic, and you've got flavoring. And all these things are to protect the wine, keep yeasts from fermenting it into more alcohol, which would go against the whole product. And I think I read somewhere that you can help stabilize the carbon dioxide with gum arabic.
Okay.
That's probably why that's in there. Had a bit of mouthfeel.
But even still, I mean, I poured this, whatever it was, 30 minutes ago, and the bubbles are still dissipating already. It tastes fine. I mean, like, it's basically juice. To be honest, if I'm going this route, I'd rather just go for like a soda or something.
Well, yeah, and there's just nothing there's bubbles, but you don't really have anything cleansing the palate. It's just cloying, it's lingering sweetness.
Yeah. Well, here's a question for you. Well, obviously, I'm sure they've done their market research and they know the type of people who are drinking this and this is probably the target flavor profile that they're after. So I'm not questioning that. This probably isn't made for us. Well, I know it's not made for us because I don't even know the last time I drank non-alcoholic wine. If you were, if alcohol wasn't in wine, or you could drink wine that was just as good, that was non-alcoholic, would you do that, do you think?
Yeah, I don't think my passion for wine is really about the alcohol whatsoever. It's about connecting with a place and being able to have a sense of place from a drink, which is just insane to me. It's about balancing farming and science and art, if you want to call it that, all in just this like everyday beverage you can drink.
Yeah.
That's what's cool about it to me. I could take or leave the alcohol.
I guess I'm somewhere in the middle, where it's like that would be great for during the week or something along those lines. But there is something about the alcohol in terms of just from a social aspect. And I think that's what's interesting too, is if we look at how people are consuming wine today, especially younger demographics, is they're having wine when they socialize. It's not something, they're having at home, sadly, drinking a bottle of wine by themselves. They listen to Adele or something. It's about socializing. And so the alcohol, it's not just about what it brings to the wine itself from a component perspective, but, fuels conversation and in a healthy, moderate way, of course.
Yeah. Well, I can 100% agree with that, because we have greatly decreased our wine consumption in this household just based on that fact that we're not getting together and, having dinner parties or having wine tastings. So, we open a bottle if we're having a nice dinner every once in a while, but it's certainly not a thing that we're grabbing every evening.
Well, we'll try wine number 2. Maybe this is a good segue to wine number 2 to see whether this red wine. Actually, I was surprised. So I picked this up from Ryan, because obviously we don't need to buy 2 non-alcoholic red wines. So in a soda stream, and just smelling it on the way back home, it did smell like wine, kind of.
Just to clarify, I didn't carbonate it. It's just in a bottle, a soda stream bottle. This is what the bottle looks like. It's the Loxton Australian Cabernet Sauvignon. It's de-alcoholized to 0.5% alcohol. So I think the winery's around like the Riverland district by the River Murray or whatever.
The bulk area, one of the bulk areas of Australia.
The bulk areas.
That's an area, or in general, that's really struggling with access to water, not having enough water to irrigate, quite costly to irrigate as a result. And so a lot of people, I think, are abandoning, like you've seen, I don't know if things have changed recently, but there seem to be like a lot of people just like going bankrupt, having to get out of the industry for that reason.
Yeah. I remember seeing photos of like vineyards that could afford water and vineyards on the other side of a fence or something that couldn't. And it's just.
But those type of areas,
craziness.
They're not, they're bulk areas. They're producing a lot of grape, but they're not making a lot per ton for those grapes. So it's not like wildly lucrative. And here we are drinking this non-alcoholic wine from that area. That's what, $7 a bottle? Is this not only economically sustainable, is it sustainable, period? And if we're going for a non-alcoholic beverage, does it make sense to go with something that's so water intensive when it's coming from dry regions? Like, it does smell vaguely wine-like, kind of really baked red fruits. Some confected oak character, I think. Ooh. Oh, yeah. That was more what I was expecting. Yeah.
It's sweet. It's sweet.
It's like, to me, this is what, when we talked about, okay, alcohol brings weight and body, the first thing you immediately think is like, oh, this is incredibly thin.
Yeah.
In a way, well, if anything, the Frexienet, the sugar gives it some weight.
Yeah, exactly. Whereas this is just like colored water almost,
Yeah, well, there's next to no tannin, which, you kind of alluded to that before, which is kind of like removed or not added back.
Yeah.
And then really quite tart. I mean,
Yeah, this one has better acid profile, but it's probably trying to balance the sugar because this one's also sweet.
yeah, I wonder what the sugar is. I would guess high teens, if not maybe higher.
Because it's lacking a few elements, it could be lower and just coming across
More pronounced.
more
Well, that's the
pronounced.
thing, because when you have some of those like so-called sweet reds, you have the bitterness of the tannin with the sugar. I mean, there's still a perception of sweetness to be sure, but they balance it out. It's kind of like a vermouth in that perspective. Like you need sugar in vermouth to balance like the intensity of the bitterness of the herbs
Yeah.
and everything.
Mm-hmm.
And without tannin in this wine specifically, it's kind of like, well, we're left with sweetness and not much else. It's quite disjointed. And this is the problem. At least like the sparkling, it's like, okay, it vaguely could be wine. I don't know about this one.
Well, I think it's like what you were saying, where the alcohol provides a lot of mouthfeel and body. And so they've probably left as much sugar in this as they can to give you some semblance of a richer palate, without it being just off-putting in terms of sweetness. But then maybe they don't use products like gum arabic where you could build a bit of mouthfeel.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm sure like this company's been around since the 1980s, I think. So I think they've probably honed their recipe to the best that they can.
Which is also a nice segue because I think a better option, arguably, than these non-alcoholic wines are some of the low alcohol wines out there. And obviously, if you're someone who doesn't drink or can't drink for whatever reason, those aren't options. But if you're someone who's like purely for health reasons, looking to decrease their alcohol consumption or reach for something that's not like a 16% Zin or something like that, there are some really good low alcohol options out there, that are, start at, 5%, like a Moscato d'Asti type thing. It's quite sweet, but even still, there's people who are pioneers when it comes to lower alcohol wines like Forest and Marlborough, New Zealand, making, Sauvignon Blanc that I think is under 10%, right?
Yeah, and doing that through vineyard techniques.
Yeah, and to me that makes more sense, because the
Yeah.
wines themselves are quite good, and it's about finding ways in the vineyard, not in the winery, through these technical processes to come up with something that's a more moderate alcohol level.
Mm-hmm. He's using equipment they already had, or he's running his hand crew through another pass for something specific. And there's a cost associated with that, but it's negligible when you compare it to installing a spinning cone still in your winery or shipping product out to get it distilled at a place that does that, or getting a reverse osmosis machine in. Like, these are all huge expenditures, capital expenditures that he's avoiding just by some simple vineyard trials that turned out to work.
Yeah, and then as a result, creating kind of respected wines that score well with critics, as opposed to these non-alcoholic wines, which are really poor substitutes for the real thing. It's tough to make it, so it's not supposed to be derogatory or anything.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of other great options out there, and I don't know if wine's the answer. You think, okay, a glass of wine is a glass of wine, but it's really not. The difference between 12.5% alcohol and 14% is significant, actually, even though you think to yourself, okay, it's just a couple percent. And then how your body metabolizes that alcohol is also quite different, especially when you get to higher alcohol levels. So,
right.
Making that adjustment, thinking, okay, I'm going to reach for something that's a little lower alcohol, is part of that kind of healthy moderation. The wine industry wants to stay relevant. They need to think of ways of engaging people, promoting wine as part of a healthy, balanced lifestyle. And, it would be great to see more wineries doing lower alcohol wines, not across the board of their portfolio necessarily, but okay, we do one or two, low alcohol wines where we're using vineyard techniques to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they would find there's a market there.
Yeah. So they could do it through packaging too, like I know at 750 mil has been the standard for a long time, but 375s, 500 mil bottles. Well, I'd love to hear from people out there if they're doing dry January, if they're coping, if they're drinking wines like this and liking them, if they're drinking wines like this and they're not liking them and they're dreading the rest of January. Can't wait till February 1st.
I'd love to know if people have been drinking non-alcoholic wines as part of dry January. So let us know in the comments. If you like non-alcoholic wines, like the video. If you like drinking, definitely like the video, because this will probably be our one and only non-alcoholic wine episodes. Time and a place for these in,